Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. 10 years have passed. Let's discuss our thoughts, feelings about this film, because I think some stuff has changed.
We have a signal now for when I'm needed. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning to them.
Yes, sir. Welcome to Beyond the Bat Signal. Join me as we dive into the depths of Batman's lore, dissecting the Rogues Gallery, and uncovering the stories of our iconic vigilante known as the Dark Knight. Beyond the Bat Signal is a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network, hosted by Batman on Film. Feel free to check out batman-on-film.com, where you can see a whole list of shows that has a ton of podcasts, including Ryan Lauer's The Batman Book Club, Peter Arvera's Straight Outta Gotham, and he also has a Spider-Man podcast. Also, kind of curious to see how he feels about the new Spider-Man trailer that just broke a record. And even the host website, Batman on Film, where the editor-in-chief, Bill Jet Ramey, has his own show, The Social Hour, and then they even have like something where they're doing a Batman 1966 series. So check it out. It's a lot of fun. I definitely tune in to each and every episode. Now, with that being said, let's get to what we want to discuss on today's episode, which is Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. 10-year anniversary. And I hate that the fact that I think of this movie and I hear, the first thought that comes to my mind is, well, it was controversial. And, I have rewatched it. I've rewatched it so many times, actually. And with each and every time that I've viewed this film, I've liked it more and more. And in front of me, I do have a bunch of headings that I know I want to talk to about. But with that being said, I also kind of just want to go off script and share my overall thoughts. And I think that's what I'm going to start with, is my overall thoughts of remembering when this film was announced. And just think of the starting point, because, you can go on a bunch of other shows, and heck, Zack Snyder's been on some shows where, he talks about how the script came to be, and you'll get really good in-depth analysis. But for fans' perspectives, I think that's what I enjoy also. So I'll share right from, I remember watching Superman in theaters with a bunch of my friends and loving that film. I know that at the ending was pretty controversial, but in my head I said, well, what else was he supposed to do? It came with consequences, and I kind of like that, where it kind of forces your hero, aka Superman, to kind of having to make a tough decision. And then I remember being poolside, and I had two of my buddies over, and we were discussing Superman, and my buddy Dave, who you've heard on the show, told me they just announced Batman vs. Superman at San Diego Comic-Con. And I said, get out. And my first thought was, well, we just got The Dark Knight Rises. And if I'm not mistaken, it was 2013 that they announced this film. And it kind of blew me away. I was shocked. I didn't know how I felt about another Batman. Just because a year prior, we were getting over the Nolan trilogy, which was epic to so many fans, and then all of a sudden we're getting another Batman, and I felt like, is this too soon? And I said, why aren't we getting another sequel to Superman? And I feel like, DC Comics and DC itself and Warner Brothers owed it to Superman to have another film, and especially the way they ended off. Like, that was such a good film. They made, I think, $700 million that it took home, that film. And, and it's like, how do you not go with another Superman film and give Batman a little bit of a rest? And I know that Marvel was on a heater where they were coming out with their own universe, and I'm pretty sure that it was Warner Brothers that said, well, we have to create our own universe. And it started with Superman, and you had Chris Nolan, who kind of oversaw things with Superman, and then you had Zack running the show. And for those of you that have watched Zack, heard Zack Snyder is a huge comic book buff. This guy is a fan just like everybody else, and he sees the heroes the way we see our heroes, and he is also a filmmaker. He's an artist, and you have to also look through his eyes and say, well, what can I do that's different? Now, when San Diego Comic-Con, I remember watching the clip, and I just rewatched it again, and it gave me chills. That announcement and how he hyped up the fans. The fans were so engaged. I was engaged. I already knew what was coming, and I couldn't wait to just see how he announced it, even though I remember. But yet, for me, he had my full undivided attention. And you're watching Zack, and you're like, man, this guy, one thing, people can criticize him all they want, but you cannot deny that this guy was a fan then, and he's a fan now of these comic book characters, and he loves them. And the way, he selected Henry Cavill, like, from page to screen, this guy is Superman through and through. And then he decides to go in a different direction. Rather than getting normally what we see as a younger Batman, for what we're used to, he wanted someone that was more of an age Batman. So the whole announcement kind of left me like, okay, like, not everyone was excited. I wasn't. I just thought, well, we already had a Batman. And then I remember seeing Batman on film. They released the first image of Batman with the Batmobile. And again, page to screen. Holy smokes, this is the Dark Knight Returns Batman with the cape and cowl, and it looks epic. And I just remember it was a black and white photo. I remember them selecting Ben Affleck, and it's like, okay, like, I'm not a Ben Affleck hater. I actually really like him as an actor, and I thought he had good acting chops, and let's see what he can do. The guy's he looks like Bruce Wayne, so give the guy a chance. But I know that there was a lot of backlash with that selection, but I feel like there's always backlash with any Batman they choose, whether it's Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, heck, Ben Affleck. Remember Heath Ledger? Probably the most popular Joker, arguably the best Joker to ever portray him. And that's one thing that Zack did, was the way he selected these actors to portray these characters. There was no denying that he knew what he was doing. He did a phenomenal job. Phenomenal. Superman, Batman, and then you even had Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot. And they did such an incredible job casting for this Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice film. And you look at the actors, I'm like, oh my God, this person was in the film, this person was in the film. Now, I remember the filming began in 2014. I remember pictures were being released here and there, and you can kind of tell that this vision was going to be a bit darker, and it felt like, even though Zack loves his CGI, it was a grounded take on these characters. The budget was huge, with, I think it was somewhere around between 200 and 250 million, and this is a film with, basically, it was going to be epic the way it was shaping up to be. Like, you have two of arguably the best comic book characters in the world in one film, and it's the first time ever. And you have Zack leading the way. And to me, you look at Ben Affleck, who is a big name, and then Henry Cavill, who clearly proved himself as Superman. The guy started in the first Superman film and then led the way. Like, he looked incredible. And both these guys, like, physically, they look like they're comic book characters. And to me, I've said it 3 times already, page to screen, these guys look exactly like Batman and Superman. And to me, Zack Snyder pretty much insisted on a human, realistic, from, like, when you look at Batman's suit, it was very realistic. It looked just like that bat suit, that cape and cowl looked like cloth. And obviously it was armored, but man, Batman looked absolutely terrifying. That first scene in the film with Batman was so intimidating. And then all of a sudden you see him and he's branding people. And I don't know, to me, it just, anyway, let's get into, because I'm kind of going everywhere. But I do want to talk about how I felt about the film walking out. And, I remember going into this film and I just said, okay, like, what are the expectations? I remember not seeing the reviews at that point and the feedback. I just remember going with my friends. I remember watching it and I said, wow, this movie is heavy. It's deep and much darker tone, but I was used to that in a way. I don't think it was as grounded, not even close, to any Nolan films, which it's hard to be grounded when you have a guy flying in midair, and there's all this CGI being used. It's not going to happen. Nolan really doesn't really use a lot of CGI in his films. So, but I remember walking out and just saying, I'm not sure if I liked that film. I didn't know how I felt about it. But I do remember talking about it with my friends, and we all had the same, like, kind of idea. Like, we walked out of The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises saying, that film was epic. Best film of the year. It should get an Oscar. I remember this. I remember thinking, Heath Ledger, like, that guy was just insane, and couldn't stop talking about it. But then, you get to Batman vs Superman, and I walked out of the theater thinking, I don't know how I feel about it. I don't, I feel like there was some back and forth between, I remember thinking, well, Ben Affleck, he was Bruce Wayne, but just didn't like the feeling that I had walking out of that film. And I couldn't put my finger on as to why, because I thought that there was a lot of good parts to it. And then I remember getting the Blu-ray, and it came with the theatrical version, and then they also came with the Ultimate Edition, which was pretty much the extended cut. And immediately I went to Best Buy, I picked up this Blu-ray, went home, and I said, well, I'm going to throw on the 3-hour version. And almost instantly, this film felt better by the end of it. And I had a lot of questions, but not in a bad way. I had it where I was like, okay, well, where's this story going to go? And it left me wanting to watch it again and again and again, because of, philosophically, it was deep. Visually, it was deep. Like, you can really look at each scene like it truly mattered and said, well, okay, well, what's the meaning behind this? What were the Easter eggs behind this? And Zack was really intentional of where he placed certain things. Like, for example, the Riddler question mark is one of the obvious ones. Then even the nightmare sequence, which I thought was brilliantly done. And to me, that whole nightmare where you kind of see into the future and there's like Superman kind of ruling everything, and then who's supporting him? Parademons. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And you can tell that Darkseid completely has taken over because you see his Omega symbol, and then you have like a time traveling Flash that kind of says that Lois is the key. And right away you're like, well, what does that mean? But it gets you excited for wanting more into this universe, and answers are going to be revealed in more films. And I think that Zack kind of understood the assignment. You had one of the, like, to me, that was one of the smartest and most impactful part of the films. And speaking of Easter eggs, like, Batman, I know a lot of people hate the no gun, or the killing rule, and clearly Ben broke it, or Batman broke his no killing rule. And in this film, the more I watch it, the more I understand why he kills. I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm not a fan at all of Batman killing. That's just not who he is. But for this film, I think it was applicable. However, when you see it on a Batmobile and he's going around shooting people in present day, it just didn't jive well with me. Okay, I'm not saying that this is a perfect film. I'm not saying that this is an incredible film at all. But I would give it about a 7.5 out of 10. Now, we talked about the nightmare sequence, and that left the fans wanting for more. And I just thought that, like, even for me, I'm like, well, like, I have to go back, and the rewatchability about this film and things that you're just constantly picking up made it a lot of fun. And watching that Ultimate Edition again, like when that came out, it was so impactful for me because it gave me a chance to let this film kind of breathe again and watch it and understand it even further. And I appreciate films like, the one thing with Zack Snyder films, he doesn't dumb it down for anybody, for lack of a better term, but to rewatch it and kind of understand it a bit more and more and more, I appreciate that in a filmmaker. And something like kind of uncovering the secrets, like, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this, truth be told, I was watching this movie about a week ago before I'm obviously recording this podcast, and I was recording with my wife, and she's like, did you notice that the bomb was underneath the wheelchair? And I said, what? Like, this whole time I've been watching, I must have watched this movie at least 30 times, and the bomb was under the wheelchair, and how did I not notice that? And she was the one who pointed it out. I don't know how many times she's watched this film, at least once prior to that, and she noticed it right away. So, hey, but as fans, like, through discussion and just watching, videos that we may have missed on YouTube, and that's what makes this film so much fun. And, I remember in 2016, like, you look at the statistics of it, it did really well. Like, listen to these numbers, and I'll start with the opening weekend. $424 million opening weekend. Then let's talk about the overall gross income. $874.3 million worldwide, and that includes $330.4 million domestically and $544 million internationally. Now, it fell below expectations to the 1 billion mark, but, like, man, you cannot say that economically the gross income of $874.3 million is by all means bad. That's incredible. This film did extremely well. The one thing that really did hurt is that significant second weekend drop, and that was just due to mixed reception. Rotten Tomatoes didn't help it either. And, let's talk about that for a second. And I feel like this podcast is going to go every which way, but let's see. Got 27%. This film got 27%. And I find that really, really hard to believe. Like, this is not, by all means, a 27% tomato meter score. I'm sorry. And I feel like critics just wanted to hate on this film. And I don't know why. But, and then you look at what fans thought of it, and it was the polar opposite. And I don't know if that's a bunch of Zack Snyder fans that are just trying to push his film. But, like, there's no way that it was a 27%. And the more I watch this film, the more I personally, I would have given this, like, this to me deserves not a Rotten Tomato, but by no means, but it does not belong in the 27% range. Maybe in the 60 or 70%, but wow. That number was so low, and clearly it influenced a lot of moviegoers not to go rewatch this film. But man, and it had the potential to be rewatched. Like I've watched this only one time in theater, but again, a lot of my friends are not huge Batman moviegoers. Okay, so it all depends, right? But at the same time, 27%, I feel like, and it does dictate a lot about like how many times people are going to go see this film. It is a heavy influence, and I hate that it is. But 2016 was when this film came out, and I just feel like it does not belong in that class as one of the all-time worst reviewed films. It just doesn't, in my opinion. Actually, while using this lovely Google machine, I just searched up Justice League, and I'm not talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League. I'm talking about, the one where the studio got involved and it was a theatrical release, and that got 39%, and that's just baffling to me. Are you kidding me? So you think that BVS is worse than Justice League? Pfft, absolutely not. Okay, to me, that should be flipped in reverse. And even then, I still don't think it deserved a Rotten Tomato. But with that being said, yeah, it did suffer from poor reception. And I'm really curious to think about what you fans thought about this film and how you feel about it then versus now. A lot of people say it's divisive and there's no in between. And I disagree. I do think that, yes, it is divisive because I know that there's people that just don't like this film. But I have to believe that people have learned to appreciate this film, and I think it's been aging very well as the years have gone on. And 10 years have passed, and it's hard to believe. And the way that this film looks aesthetically is absolutely beautiful. Zack shot a beautiful looking film, and it had a lot of heart, and there was a lot of characters and a lot of character development. And unfortunately, yeah, I do feel like Superman got the short end of the stick, but this is a Superman film. And one thing that does also get overlooked is Lois Lane, as she's on the screen and doing her journalistic work. She really does have her own little storyline, and it really does contribute to proving Superman's innocence and and who she is as a reporter. Very independent, and that's one character that I thought was overlooked in this film, and the impact that she had, even right to the very end where she had tried to save Superman and tried to get the kryptonite to go and help defeat Doomsday. Now, the whole Doomsday controversy, one thing I do remember is when I was watching the trailers, I was like, man, they're really giving away a lot of the film. And I didn't know why. It felt really odd to me. It seemed like they were panicking then. And I picked up on it. And I remember when they released Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I was like, I really hope that he doesn't overdo it and try to give too much of the film away. but just like they did in BVS, because I think it did also hurt. And looking at it, it just, I remember those trailers, and I remember seeing Doomsday, and I'm like, why would you give this away? Even having Wonder Woman, one thing is, you could have had Gal Gadot. She didn't have to be announced. She didn't have to be announced that, oh, Wonder Woman is going to be in this film. Like, you could have left the element of surprise for these characters, because, let people speculate all they want. But like, you don't have to give it all away. And, you know, because it gives people a little bit extra to talk about. Like, Wonder Woman in this film, to me, was so impactful for the very little that she was in it. And man, she was awesome. And then she got her own film, and clearly, like, that just rocked the box office in such a good way, and Rotten Tomatoes. But yeah, like, that was another thing. Doomsday and Wonder Woman, you didn't have to give away on a silver platter to fans. Like, for us, I know we want everything, but like, give us some surprises. Like, there's no doubt that Zack made this for the fans. This was straight. It felt like it was out of a comic book, and you could tell that Zack Snyder is a comic book fan, and it just like that's what it felt like. I don't know, and he put a lot of thought into it. But you have the holy trinity of comic book characters with Wonder Woman, Superman, and of course Batman. But the other thing was the big title debate. Zack Snyder, if you listen to him talk about it, he originally wanted Batman v Superman. It was simple, to the point, but the studio was the one who insisted on Dawn of Justice to signal the start of a larger DC universe, which I get it, but people just didn't want that huge title. I don't think. It wasn't necessary. I know that the V wasn't to represent versus. Snyder wanted to feel like it was like a legal case. Like, I don't know, Brown v. Board of Education. Something like that. Okay? It's pretty classy for a superhero. And like, now as fans, we use BVS, or Batman v Superman. I like that. But what do you think? Do you like the short legal style, or did you prefer Batman versus Superman? Right? Like, really, we had Batman versus Superman, and it was not a big, huge part of the film, to be honest. Like, I get it. Like, you see the whole basis of it. Like, Bruce Wayne is just not a fan of Superman. This is a guy who can kill just the snap of his fingers. It's kind of crazy, and it's crazy how much of an influence that the studio had, because Zack had every intention on making a second Superman film, and at the end of it, Zack was going to sprinkle in Batman as one of the final scenes, and then the studio heard it, and all of a sudden that kind of snowballed, and the studio's like, well, we want Batman into the next film. And right there, the studio saw cha-ching. They wanted money, clearly. The studio, like, obviously, when you have Batman and Superman in a film, the expectations are going to be through the roof. Fans wanted this epic film. The studio clearly wanted $1 billion, box office gold. And then here's Snyder, where you can completely see he wanted to be faithful to the comic book characters and respect them, but also be ambitious and adapt this. And to me, like, all those pieces, they were in place, but like, it was, would the audience love this? And at the time, it didn't seem like they did. And that was what really, really hurt the film. And clearly, I'm not going to get into Justice League because we're celebrating BVS, but that really influenced how that film went, and how much of a say that the studio had in the next film, right? Because the studio was scared to fail. They didn't want to fail. But man, the reception, to me, even though audiences were mixed and clearly reviewers had a different say, 800 over 800 almost 900 million dollars to me was incredible. So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is, the box office with the numbers said one thing. The reception from critics said another thing. And then the fans, the way that they felt about this film, to me, was another thing. And to me, it's the impact of this film. I really do think is very impactful, and it would continue for years. There's no doubt that people still talk about this film, like, it is very impactful that people are still having deep discussions. Heck, Zach was on the Happy Sad Confused podcast talking about this film, this very film, and it is beloved and, yes, polarizing, but people are enamored and they're intrigued about it. And there's a lot to be said about this film. And, obviously with post BVS and the following legacy, with the big decisions and the mixed reviews, Justice League's tone had to change. And that's what the studio wanted. And they brought in, Jeff Johns as one of them, and I don't want to get into this crap about it, but Zach had one vision, the studio had another, and in his back pocket, Zach was he filmed so much, and yes, there was pieces of the film that made it into the theatrical cut, but then they hired Joss Whedon, unfortunately, due to the passing of Zach's daughter due to suicide. And the film, according to many, is unrecognizable. Zach has never seen it, and he was told, don't ever look at that film. But you compare the two films, and it was just night and day difference. And, that was due to the reception that BVS got. And it definitely left a mark and an influence on this DC cinematic universe. I think what Zack set up in Superman and then BVS, it was set up for, something to be very open world. Because then following, open world, I mean, because then following that, we had the Suicide Squad, where I thought it was a decent film. And it started to open up this universe. Even we got a film about bad guys. Incredible. Okay. But even the way the character portrayals, and it came up with a lot. It was a lot of fun to see where this was all going, and finally DC, it did create a lot of conversation, whether we liked it or not. It created a ton of conversation, and there's no doubt that BVS was ambitious. It was imperfect, but there's no denying it was undeniably influential. Now, let's get into what this film was really about. It was the clash between the Dark Knight and the Man of Steel. Okay? That's what the studio wanted. Zach helped create that. Chris Terrio helped write it. And at its heart, it's a story of conflict where Batman fights Superman because of the fear and distrust. Lex Luthor, he's another part of it, and he's one. Who's the guy that portrays him? I don't know why I'm having a brain fart on this one, but the casting was very interesting, and I did not like the casting at all at the time. Jesse Eisenberg, that's it. Just came to my head. And I didn't like this Lex Luthor portrayal whatsoever. And again, that's another one that really did grow on me, and I appreciated a smart but evil Lex Luthor, and very calculated, and I appreciated it. I really did, and I've grown to appreciate it even more, where Jesse Eisenberg is a phenomenal actor, and he, the way, and I know Zach has said this before, where that was not the vision that they had for Lex Luthor. But when Jesse came in and, um, you know, the script, it took Zack by surprise and said, let's go in this direction. And I remember him saying that. And, I looking back at it, I don't think it was a mistake. I actually appreciated this direction that they went on. Like, yeah, Lex Luthor in the comics is one way, but, there's no denying that he is evil and calculated, and I love it. Like, I really do. That's something that really did grow on me. The other thing was that this film became such a big meme, and it was what used to be the Martha, or what was it, the warehouse scene, but now it's the Martha moment. And critics argue about the undercut tension. Like, fans say it was humanized by Superman, but people just didn't like it. Like, save Martha. And I remember all the memes, but this Martha moment where Batman goes and saves Martha, and then you have that huge fight to save Martha, it was groundbreaking in my opinion. I was like, is this out of the Arkham series? Like, it felt like I was watching or playing Arkham Knight at the way that Batman was fighting in that film, and it looked like it was straight out of a video game. And to me, probably the best Batman fight sequences in any film, I'd put it right up there with the Batman, that opening scene where it was so punishing. But I don't know, like, that warehouse scene or the Martha moment was, to me, it ranks up there as the top 1 or 2 for sure. Batman just felt rugged. He felt punishing, and he felt mean. This was an older, meaner Batman, like, and you felt it. And there's a lot of questions throughout this film, like even what happened to Robin. Like, I love the fact that they just threw in a Joker moment where he looked like he spray painted over Robin's costume, and it was, okay, well, what the hell happened to Robin? Clearly we have a dead Robin here. And it left for questions and just curiosity, and I love it. This film, what could have been? I keep thinking about what could have been. What was the direction? What if they made a second Superman movie? What if the studio didn't get involved? What if they continued with Zack Snyder's Justice League and made part 2 and 3? A lot of what ifs. What if, to me, people even criticize, like the critics criticized The Flash, and I don't know why, because to me that was a good film. Okay, my least favorite part was the CGI babies. That was really weird, but whatever. Other than that, I think that they executed that film perfectly. And yeah, there was a lot of backlash with Ezra Miller, and I get that. But there's no denying that was not a good film. Now, going back to BVS, the actors, the way that they portrayed their characters, I thought it was phenomenally done. And they had big names here, okay? Jesse Eisenberg, Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, did a really, really good job executing. Gal Gadot, given for what she had, people were familiar with her from the Fast and the Furious franchise, but then here she is playing Wonder Woman, and obviously she was criticized, but prior to being, like, obviously when she was selected, but then, you see her in the film, you're like, wow, badass. Another one was Amy Adams, where she nailed it as Lois Lane, and she was great in Man of Steel, and then of course in BVS she knocked it out of the park. And I really like Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I thought he was a fantastic Alfred. Not my favorite, but I feel like it's because we didn't get enough of him to really see what he can do. But I did appreciate Alfred. He always has like these snarky little comments, and that's Alfred, right? And he's always so supportive. But yeah, like, there's no denying, like, when Ben Affleck, I to this day, I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion, everyone's got their favorite Bruce Wayne. Mine would be Ben Affleck. He's not my favorite Batman, but he is my favorite Bruce Wayne. Kind of curious, what would be yours? Who's your favorite Bruce Wayne and favorite Batman? My favorite Batman right now, I would probably say it's Bale. But I feel like with a couple more films, I am going to say Robert Pattinson. And the other thing with Batman, I mentioned page to screen several times now. The Dark Knight Returns. Talk about a heavy influence, and even that heavy armor, like taken right out of the comic book. And how is it that as fans we do not appreciate what Zack was trying to do here? He really did the work, as Pete Vera likes to say. He did the work. Really put in his time, his research, and his understanding. This guy was a comic book buff. We had someone that loves comics, and he really tried to implement a lot of life into these characters, which as fans, I know we appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that this movie was daring. I appreciate the philosophy behind it, the philosophical story behind it. I appreciate the multiple storylines that each character brings. I appreciate the world building that this movie brought and how it was building out to a bigger universe. I appreciate all of it. And the more this film ages, the more I wonder what could have been. Don't get me wrong. I am and always will be a solo Batman film guy. I can't wait for the Batman. But I think I always wonder about, like, well, what was Ben Affleck's film going to be? What was it going to be like? The way people talk, they said it was going to be epic. It was going to be incredible. It was supposed to be like it was from Arkham Asylum. And, you know, what could have been. But overall, like, you look back at this film, and as I literally have it on the background right now, and I'm watching it, and the Martha moment is about to come up as we speak. I have actually Gal Gadot coming or going into an airplane, or no, sorry, she's watching the TV screen, and there's unusual activity at Heroes Park. So, but I know that Superman's going to fight Batman at this very moment. So, you know, this film was, a lot of fun to watch, and still is, and people are still talking about it. Heck, we're celebrating 10 years. Talk about how time has just flown by. And truly, I believe this. I think that the film has gotten better and better and better as the years have gone by. And a little thing that I did not that I missed, but wanted to mention, was how awesome it was to have Bruce Wayne email Diana Prince and say, "It is you. Who are you? Where have you been?" And there's a picture from, I guess, Wonder Woman back during the first world. And clearly it's a picture that when we watched the Wonder Woman film, it was a picture that's where it was taken. And I appreciate that. I love it. And then they kind of show a little bit of like the meta-human. So you see Flash, you see Aquaman, you see Cyborg, and how, again, world building. And this film had it all. And I was here for it. I really do hope that Zack somehow gets to close this chapter, whether it's through a comic or an animation. I highly, highly doubt that they'll ever make another film that regards this universe. But I am curious. You know, this film was a lot of fun, and I wonder, for those of you that are listening, how do you feel about it? What do you think about this film? How does it age to you? What did you think when it came out versus now? Share your thoughts. Now, where can you share your thoughts? Well, Beyond the Bad Signal, we're on Instagram at Beyond the Bad Signal. We also have an email. So if you want to email at beyondthebadsignal@gmail.com, you can shoot me an email there, or we're on X/Twitter, where it's called at Beyond Bad Signal. Another big thing. So I was a guest on the Bat Pod podcast, and I was obviously I was able to talk about Batman Legends of the Dark Knight Annual #1. So it was Batman Duel, and I had a lot of fun with Bill Beer, and he was an incredible host. I enjoyed talking about this story. Definitely worth checking out. It's going to be released March 22nd. So tune in. It's going to be in the show notes. But with that being said, my name is Domenic. This is Beyond the Bat Signal, and we are signing off. Peace.